Good evening. My name's Sven Burkerts, and I am a co-editor of AGNI with my close colleague, Bill Pierce. And I would like to extend a warm autumnal welcome to all of you to this event, the second of three, which is celebrating the publication of AGNI 92. So we have 2 print issues a year, as most journals like this do, but they acquire a kind of, the actual publication and appearance acquires a symbolic value. They are what everything we do tends toward. They are the goal, and when an issue is complete and finally published, it is a kind of closure, a very real kind of closure for all of us. And it's an occasion where we are able then to put out to the world, in effect, what the world, the literary world, has brought to us, in which we've edited, culled, looked at, accepted, worked with, in order to present what we always hope is not only a coherent vision of things, but one that's timely to our times, and such times we are living in. It's slightly emphasized by the fact that the actual arrival date of issue 92 at our brick and mortar location is happens to be November 3rd, which definitely gives everything a bit of a, bit of an aura of something. Depending on how things run afterwards, it can acquire a different sort of psychological resonance. In any case, we have a really, I think, really interesting event lined up. I have to say a few things that I guess they are sort of, let's call it just business things I need to bring to your attention in a practical sense. Before I introduce our evening's hosts, Ruben Quesada and Jessica Q. Stark. The first of these is to use chat, direct messages carefully, because you don't want private notations that happen to suddenly go everywhere because you weren't quite paying attention to what command you were following. The Q&A format is separate from chat, and at any point in the reading, you can queue up questions in the Q&A, and you can also at that time read other people's questions and vote for any that you think are you'd like to hear addressed particularly. And as you'll see in the chat, there's a special code tonight for new subscribers, and we are offering 30% off by using the code. It's one word, capital N, night 2, no separation between the word and the numeral. And we would very much like to thank Boston University, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council for their support, generosity. So as mentioned, our hosts tonight are Ruben Quesada and Jessica Q. Stark. Ruben has been poetry editor for AGNI and part of our team since 2019. He has been the executive director of Arte Americas and a founder of the AWP Latinx, something like, okay, this is where one's handwriting breaks down. He's the author of a chapbook, Revelations, as well as a chapbook of translations of the poet Luis Cernuda. He has taught widely, including at Northwestern, Vermont College, and the UCLA writing program. His collection, The Next Extinct Mammal, which alarms me when I read it, was published in 2011, I'm sorry. And he works as a blogger at Kenyan Review alongside working so closely with us on all these things. And Jessica Q. Stark, she's a mixed race Vietnamese poet and scholar. She's the author of 3 chapbooks. And her chapbook manuscript was selected by Dorothea Lasley for Heavy Feathers Double Take Poetry Prize in 2016. And she's been with our team since 2019. So welcome to our hosts, our readers, our audience, and off we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Hi, everyone. This is Ruben. I'm excited to be here with all of you, along with Jessica. Hi, Jessica. Jessica's going to get us going, but just so you know, feel free to use the chat to include any respond to any readings or any questions you might have. The format of this is we're going to introduce each reader. Each reader will read, have an introduction before their reading, and we're going to hold the Q&A until the very end. So I'll hand this over to Jessica.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks Sven for that. And thank you also to the team at AGNI. It's, I'm relatively new, and it's been such a pleasure in this past year to really get to know all of you and to work with this team that holds so much passion for language and for poetry. So that's been a privilege to read this work for AGNI. And I'd like to introduce our first reader. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first reader, Torrin A. Greathouse. Torrin A. Greathouse is a poet and a force. I first encountered their work online through a video recording for Button Poetry, and I'm so glad that I was witness to their presence, even through a screen, before reading their work on the page. There is an urgency in their composure, a sense of a light breaking open. Their work traverses the vulnerable, permeable landscapes of the corporeal that embody, in so many ways, a sense of true hunger. As they write in their poem, Obad Beginning in Handcuffs, quote, "Hunger's vocabulary is a fickle thing," end quote. And the speaker in Greathouse's poetry has a fierce vocabulary for some of the most human qualities we share: to desire, to hunger, to love, to be free, and all of the complicated interrelations between maintaining or ensuring those simple needs. Torrin A. Greathouse is a transgender crippled punk and the author of Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, coming out in Milkweed editions this year in December. Very excited for that. Their work has appeared in Plowshares, New England Review, Tri-Quarterly, AGNI, and Kenyan Review. She is a MFA candidate at the University of Minnesota and assistant editor of The Shallow Ends. So please welcome Torrin.
Hey y'all, so I'm gonna be reading some poems from the forthcoming book, and I'm gonna start off with the poem that is coming out in the issue of AGNI. Essay fragment, moral model of disability. That winter we kept finding the wings of pigeons pulled from their sockets, viscera deleted by the rain, a symbol stripped of its meaning, wary bead mistaken for a pebble. My mother will not admit to our history, heirloom of disease. Once, malformed children were dashed against the rocks. Slay the child, spare your now unburdened blood. My chest is rivered with cracks, my sternum broken like an ox. My father tells me that a wolf will eat their own young, those too weak to survive. This morning, a stranger in a strip mall offers blessing palms to pull this shattered bone into church's sharp-edged mercy. This disabled body is always product or vessel of sin or for mercy. always this body of crooked back and side-stepped gender, body of apple taker and rib giver, this body of ungiftings worth praying away. Essay fragment, medical model of disability. The disabled body is always closest to machine in its dysfunction, most fixable when it is furthest from human body. As metaphor or rhetorical question, if a clock is broken, do you repair it or ask the world to conform to its sense of time? Footnote 1, you must fix what is holding you back. Disabled body is abnormality, outlier that must be removed from the data for more accurate result. Medical model, footnote 2, formerly functional limitation model, formerly biological inferiority model speaks, says people with disabilities need to work harder to overcome themselves. The cure is to make them more normal. Footnote 3, read less disabled. My disabled body is price tag, is scalpel bait, a prayer to hospital ceilings, or my disabled body is a weight on society. Footnote 4, another price tag. The medical model says, my disabled body is like any disease. If we discover a new and hungry sickness, is it our duty to cure it or to let it be? Essay fragment, economic model of disability. How do you calculate in hard mathematics the value of a disabled body? The body which reduces like a fraction to an icon or object of pity in physics. Work is defined as the degree to which an object or body is affected by an applied force or body and is not defined by effort exerted toward a task. Example, 2 birds of equal weight fly at equal velocity toward 2 windows. If the first bird shatters its neck, spine collapsing like an equation, and 1, the window, the first bird, still alive, beak loamy with blood, has achieved a network of 0. Consider the disabled body not unlike the bird, malfunction of anatomy. Consider its potential for work. If force is defined in part by mass, how much weight, read, burden can a disabled body exert on society before their net worth is 0? Essay fragment, pre-existing conditions. And this poem is written after the list of 50 pre-existing conditions suggested in 2017 by Trump's replacement for the ACA. It's so simple, really. A pen invents the anatomy of a law, and the body becomes an excuse. Collection of reasons for its own abandonment becomes diagnosis. Check marks blooming across my palms. Will Saint Thomas ask to see my hands, the sins this body carries? Mother Mary. Scars on my wrists, my spine, a cracked rosary, eyelids, a thin and bloody veil. Trauma repeats in my skull like supplication. Fear becomes a communion of lightning on my tongue. My skull, a panic room and confessional, body named prophet and whore, faggot and dyke. I am damned for the cock and breast of me, for the split mind of me, for the hunger of my liver, for the muscles. Howl, I read the list of reasons I will be left to afford survival, my body's failures cure. On my lips, loose syllables of a prayer. Our Father, who forbids us heaven, hallowed be thy name. When the kings and the bankers count their coins, may they bite for gold and break their teeth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful. Again, if you have any questions popping up during the reading, feel free to shoot those in the Q&A. Thank you so much, Torrin. That was exceptional. I'm going to do a sort of joint introduction of the next two readers, and it's a personal pleasure to be able to introduce these next couple of speakers, as their work lies very close to my home and to my roots. Together, Nguyen Chung and Martha Collins co-translated the work of Vietnamese poet Thich Thuy Sĩ for AGNI for our latest issue. Being part Vietnamese, I've always felt I've had one foot in and outside the Vietnamese language. I was never raised fluent, although I'm more than fluent in my mother's personality, her idiosyncrasies, her gestures that remain tethered to a country that in many ways no longer exists since the time she fled from it for the US in 1975. Translation derives etymologically from the phrase bearing a cross, or to have been born. The theorist Walter Benjamin also compellingly argues, quote, "It is the task of the translator to release in his own language that pure language that is under the spell of another, to liberate the language imprisoned in a work in his recreation of that work," end quote. Mm-hmm. Translation in this sense is not the labor of merely converting words, but making more accessible invaluably another culture and the context for an utterance across history, across time. Thank you for doing this work that frames a rare window into Vietnamese culture, beyond the American War, beyond that small frame, for readers like me wishing to be born into another perspective. Nguyen Chung is a writer and poet and the co-translator of several volumes of Vietnamese poetry. He's also served for many years as research associate at the William Joyner Institute at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And Martha Collins is the author of 10 collections of poetry and has co-translated 4 volumes of Vietnamese poetry as well. She also founded the creative writing program at UMass Boston and taught at Oberlin College for 10 years. So we'll begin with a few comments from Nguyen Chung and then hear from Martha Collins. Welcome.
Garcia is a great poet from Vietnam, and it took me over 10 years to work on his translation. Born in Pak Se, Laos in 1943, Garcia joined the Buddhist order when he was 7. Being a brilliant student, he was sent to Huế, Vietnam, to continue his training. A permanent professor of Vạn Hạnh University at the age of 27, he is the translator of over 40 works of the Buddhist sutras and sastras in Sanskrit, Pali, and Chinese, plus a number of original works, especially his poetry. Not only a profound Buddhist scholar, he was also well-versed in Western philosophy. He was the first to introduce the work of Michael Foucault to a Vietnamese audience, as well as the translator of Taisei Suzuki Essays in Zen Buddhism, and author of the Philosophy of Sunyata. A dissident monk in Vietnam, he was condemned with a death sentence, which was then reduced to 25 years of hard labor. He was finally released after 17 years in prison. Garcia has been called the most eminent, most intelligent, most erudite, most spotless Zen master of Vietnam today. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll hear from Martha Collins.
Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction, and thank you, Chung. And I have to thank Chung for inviting me to work with him on these poems many years ago. We have just completed a collection of Thuy Sĩ poems entitled Dreaming the Mountain, It's been an amazing experience for me to work with him. I'm going to read 3 of Toisi's poems, including the one that appears in AGNI. 3 of these poems were written during the time that the poet was lamenting these 3 poems were written during the time that the poet was lamenting his divided and war-torn country. As Toisi contemplated what was happening to his country, he began dreaming of a desolate peak in the Chung mountain range, which became for him a representation of Vietnam, uprooted from its long history. These poems have taken on a great deal of resonance for me in this time of radical difficulty in our own country. The years away. The wind gave you 10 long years of wandering, seeing your country only in its ruin. The eastern sea still whispers to white sand, tales of compassion, breath of the Chung sun. 10 more years you were silent in the city. Love for the forest brought you close to tears. Arms reached for the sky, the birds late chirping. Life adrift, small wings closing up by the road. 10 years later, you crossed streams and forests, saw your country as bloody, abandoned fields. Evening smoke fades like wounded souls. Each river, each stream of blood and tears overflows. For 10 years, you forgot your reed-thin weakness. On slender shoulders, a new country arose. You bent your head to hear mountain and forest, chanting the endless love song of the East. The day you came back to the ancient city, the roads were still shadowed with sorrow's smoke. Eyes still glint with timeless indignation, as fresh as rain in the borderlands, as true. And this next one appears in AGNI. Street at noon. Street at noon, red sunlight, crimson flag. Life does not confide in the lover of dust. Sorrow in a century of dissolution. Dream of desert island solitude. Hatred seethes in late afternoon light. Flooding river, avalanche, tidal wave. Blinding smoke covers the eastern sky. O heaven, white hair, have pity on father's village. I went away at the crowing of the cock. The Milky Way looks bleaker night after night. If there is no loyal dust in life, where, for the lover of dust, is his native land? And the last poem. I still wait. I still wait through long, restless nights. Pale green cries sound from the forest edge. In hatred's darkness, there is still love. A star brims like tears beside my lips. I still wait through black, windless nights, the pure, shimmering black of ancients' eyes. I look deep to lengthen history's path, a river of blood and tears over the land. I still wait to forget the beating waves, the Pacific Ocean, people back and forth, the people who stayed ache in the tyrant's hands, slender reeds weighed down by the sun at dusk. Then, with a frail body, I face prison, fingers tapping time on a mossy wall. Then, my eyes closed, I go to the dream place, like early dew, like lightning, like evening clouds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was beautiful. It's my pleasure to introduce our next reader. whose work is graceful, hypnotic, and dramatic. As a queer poet, Cyrus's work has always resonated with me. He may not remember this, but more than 20 years ago, I was his student at the Idlewild Arts program. And his work has been recognized as by the Guggenheim Foundation with a fellowship, as well as the Lannan Literary Foundation. He's a recipient of a Land Literary Award and a National Poetry Series winner for his very first collection of poetry. His career spans 3 decades. His 7th book of poems is There Room for Another Horse on Your Horse Ranch is forthcoming next year. Please join me in welcoming Cyrus Cassells.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Yes, I do remember Idlewild. I just realized I've been publishing in AGNI since 1989. So I have to thank you folks for supporting me over the years. I'm going to read 3 poems that were originally published in the magazine. The first poem is in the new edition. I'm going to warn you because it's a senior sex poem. So if you don't think that sex doesn't happen after 60, you hold on to your seat. It's called The Desire Path. So you've taken a break from ex-wives, mendicant sons, and adoring sit-on-your-lap grandchildren to follow a desire path through the captivating woods with a newfound male lover. Sensuous explorer, it's the first rousing day along the glorious springtime riverbank when you can jettison your cumbersome, almost damask-heavy coat, and even the grimmest city lots and hawkish alleyways seem no longer cold and Confederate. Now, rambling on a desire path with our Tweedledee and Tweedledum clarinet cases, we lament the worrying haywire weather, how the milquetoast winters are mostly hesitant, snowless, unobliging, and the freakish summers are inglorious summers of fire, seasons of unprecedented smoke. Speaking of truant fires, ones both within and without, my brave love, I want to say, no, your routed prostate cancer hasn't diminished your outsized ardor, your avarice for life. Exhibit A, the houseboat you've acquired, you've christened, why not? Hard or soft, true virility is innocent. The architect of March lapsing into April, love, the artful magus of mid-morning climaxes and ad hoc cherry on the top haikus. My own tsunami, your mouth draws me out to sea before the great wave. So what if we're grandfathers? It's still spring. The preponderance of pear and cherry blossoms beside the desire path we've trailed is still show-stopping. Dear seaworthy captain of the Why Not, when we dare to fashion a makeshift bed to celebrate a few weeks in advance our mutual Taurus birthdays, April Fools, mischief makers, leers in love, how fallible and beautiful our bodies defying time for an hour have become. And two other poems that appeared in AGNI. This is a poem I didn't really plan on reading, but I feel like I want to. It's a poem set in Rome, which is my favorite city, and this is like my favorite spot in the Villa Pamphili under the pines. And I think it was in AGNI a couple years ago. The pines of the Villa Pamphili. Let me take you to my bodacious roll call of pines, a whole green legion of them, colossal parasols, quelling sentinels. They loom above the villa's July paragraphs of purple blooms, these salient but patient titans of probity. Couriers that seem capable of revealing time out of mind keys. Listen, when the wind balks, their keen caesura is the cool hiatus, the hush of a Roman well's rain softened stone. And when the breeze gusts once more through this sublime Gulliver-sized army, it's a mordant one, insinuating even Odysseus had to forsake his vintage sea and glistening Ithaca. Like tallow-pale Eurydice, betrayed by a glance, he became one of death's possessions. Yes, wind voice in the willow grove, brisk telltale wind. To be brutally honest, our love for the bracing earth's hard-to-pass-up pines, consoling blossoms and conveying seas, will never save us from exodus, transport from this world, though all the while the locomotive gloom-banishing blackbirds, ensconced in the brilliant choir stalls of cosmos, keep insisting, here, here. And lastly, I'll read a poem that was an AGNI that was chosen by Natasha Trethewey for Best American Poetry of that particular year. And it's the last poem in my book, The Gospel According to Wild Indigo. It's a eulogy for my mother. Elegy with a Gold Cradle. Now that you're forever ministering wind and turquoise, ashes eclipsed by the sea's thrust and the farthest tour, I know you were always more than my mother. Giveaway flecks tipped and scattered from an island paradise. Now that you're a restless synonym for the whistling fisherman's surfacing mesh, the alluring moon's path and progress through a vast chaos of unrelenting waves. Let me reveal, in the Adalos days, following your scattering, in my panoramic hotel, I found a sun-flooded cradle, so pristine, so spotlit and sacramental, beside my harbor-facing bed. I couldn't bear to rock it or even touch it, Mother. I marveled at the gold leaf bars and contours, the indomitable antique wood beneath, an emblem of unbeatable hope and prevailing tenderness. Then, for a crest-like hallowing hour, listen, my morning was suffused with the specter of your lake calm cascade of hair, inkwell dark in the accruing shadows, your rescuing, soothing contralto, and oh yes, Isabel, the longed-for fluttering of my nap-timed lids, entrancing gold of the first revealing dawns, the first indispensable lullabies. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyrus. That was lovely. Our next reader is someone I've known for some time, short time, but our friendship feels like it has always existed. His work brings me so much joy and challenges my own notions of how language can challenge linguistic tradition. His first collection of poems, Thrown in the Throat, was selected for the 2019 National Poetry Series by poet Kazim Ali. Please welcome Benjamin Garcia.
Hi. It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you to the folks who are here. Thank you to AGNI. I feel like I've been mispronouncing the name all these years. I'm going to read a poem from my not forthcoming. It's been published. It's out, Thrown in the Throat. And this is the last poem in the book. And it's about Adam Rippon's butt. So Adam Rippon, if you don't know, is a Olympic figure skater. He's the first openly gay man to win an Olympic medal for Winter Olympics. Other folks had won before, but they came out after being an athlete. He's the first one to actually be an athlete. Be competing and also out at the same time. So he got a lot of hate online. People were, constantly hoping that he would fall. And it got so petty. They were like, his butt is fake. That's not really his butt. He's wearing pads, blah, blah. He got into a Twitter fight with Mike Pence. So, Ode to Adam Rippon's butt. In the language of the body, merci for this grand bounty. I have to say ole to that Olympic butt in a way that isn't crass. So here's your VIP full access pass to that showstopper, champagne top popper. Better wear your best seersucker. Because sure, Adam's feet flow like cursive, but let's be honest, what freak nun is looking at your feet with a booty that says, God damn, I believe in God. I'm a follower, a convert to your Corvette vroom, zooming in a suit that says, eat me, the way you scarf down a double-decker burger, dripping with juices, in full carnal knowledge, it's no good for you. But you stuff your face anyway, without reservation, and even Five Guys isn't out of the question. Did I mention the special is a buy one, get one, free to hair flip online haters, spin in high heels, strike a pose, or gag on Gaga in a sequin laser light show with disco washboard stomach or red carpet ready, dashing in your leather harness, answering, what's it like to be a gay athlete in a sport so vehemently straight up homophobic? Are you still surprised? I'm not. It's the same as anywhere and always, but with better eyebrows. It's like your Madonna classic telling reporters you're a basic Catholic schoolgirl biatch, sassy and saucy and cheeky to the chin. If the Pope wants to see me, let him. Buy a ticket like anyone else. Does anyone else think about hell missing an angel? Because a butt like that was made for falling. What cushion to soften the blow? I know I'm hard, crushing ice chips with my teeth. I don't care. Just look at that derriere. Is it really so terrible to just this one time let us have this? Yes, homo, yes, me. Why should I care what one more glittering fairy has to add? It's sad. That's the discourse of some guys. Think it doesn't matter that he's gay? It matters out in public. It matters at the doctor's office. It matters to the men who would beat him, and he might get beaten in technique. Adam said as much, but no one turns a cheek like me. Smeared in Vice President Pence's rhetorical smatter, don't tell me it doesn't matter. So this is an ode to Adam Rippon's butt. Go ahead and call it shallow. The rink is so because it needs to be. Hell hath frozen over, and I'm here making angels out of snow with a fury to jump high, first crouch low. So it's a poem in a series. I'll read one more ode. If you like these poems, please support this book. It's been a little hard getting a book out during a pandemic. So this is Ode to the Corpse Flower. It references the language of flowers. So a lot of these odes, so all the odes start with in the language of, so like in the language of handkerchiefs for queer men signaling to each other. This is the language of flowers. Which in Victorian times, if you wanted to send a message like, hey, I really like you, or no thanks, you could send a specific arrangement and it meant something you had to decode. Ode to the Corpse Flower. In the language of flowers, I am the one who says, fuck you, I won't be anyone's nosegay. This Mary is her own talking bouquet. Never let a man speak for you or call you what he wants. I learned that the hard way. Amorphophallus titanum. It sure sounds pretty in a dead tongue, except it's Latin for big ugly dick. I mean, I am, but what an asshole scientist. I prefer to think of myself, and this may sound vain, as a goddess, cadaver dressed in drag, my stage name, Versace Medusa, part Lilith, part Calla Lily. Keep your heteronormative birds and bees, give me the necrophiliacs, the freaks, the meat-eating beetle and flesh fly. There I go again, allies, getting all hot and bothered, being vulgar. vulgar meaning common, as when something is below you, like a girl, forbidden to say fuck. It makes a woman sound so common. Oh, come on. That's all you expect from a flower, to be likable. But to keep it raw and 100 is to be abhorred. Fine, but even the haters will pay to hold their nose at a halftime show. They'll claim they are beyond Beyonce, sick of Selena, yet they can't look away from the live cam. No one wants to miss the showgirl as she breaks through the cake, unhooks her lingerie, La Virgen de Guadalupe with a twist of Santa Muerte. What in the hell is she wearing? Glad you ask. Death is the new Christian Dior. The latest Chanel is corpse smell. I am the weak old ham hock whore of horticulture. I bring the hothouse haute couture, and I always come in last place. Dressed to the nines, I get what I want, which is to be the 10th muse. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, little Evita de Buenos Aires, screwing and screwing over los descamisados on my rainbow tour. Fuck Whitman, fuck Pound, give me Emily D. Speaking of which, have I ever told you, Daddy, only sun gods get me hard. You want it, I got it. Let me show you how a chola really leans. Mother Nature may wear floral, but I ain't your mama. I thirst like Betty Boop at Pete Coquette, Marilyn Monroe blowing in an air vent. Say Malinche, say Truvada whore, give me more. I thrive in shade, my throat is my throne, so queen me, bitch.
Oh, Mo, oh, Mo, oh my, oh my. Thank you, Benjamin. Wow. Our final reader, whose work has been described as riven by an energy that sparks with questioning. She's the author of 6 collections of poetry, including No Ruined Stone, forthcoming next year. Her work has been recognized with fellowships by the Library of Congress and the National Endowment for the Arts. She's a professor of English at Penn State. I'm thrilled to introduce and welcome Shara McCallum.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, everyone. Benjamin, you're an awfully difficult act to follow. But I want to say that I love the poems, of course, everybody has read, amazing. And I too have been saying AGNI, apparently wrong for decades. So I'm learning something tonight, many things tonight. I'm gonna read the 3 poems. They are from the forthcoming collection Ruben mentioned. It's called No Ruined Stone, and it's predicated on a little known story about the poet Robert Burns, the 18th century Scottish poet Robert Burns, which is that he almost went to Jamaica to work on a slave plantation. And this really stuck with me, that story, and I decided after years of research to write a poem, a series of poems, a verse sequence that tells the story of what would have happened had he gone. So this is one of the book is in parts. The first half is in his voice, they're dramatic monologues, and he is in Jamaica, in Port Antonio. He is engaged in a relationship with an enslaved African woman named Nancy. The second half of the book, which I want to read one of the poems that's in conversation with these parts are in conversation the whole time. It's in the voice of his granddaughter, who is born enslaved in 1806, migrates from Jamaica to Glasgow, Scotland, and passes for white. And so those are the 2 voices that are in this collection. And then I'll read one of the 2 title poems that's in my voice. Augur. Recent unrest in Haiti, renewed fervor for abolition back home, give rise to Douglas's widening spell of dread. Awakened to the end encroaching, he holds all at Springbank hostage to his unpredictable, eruptible moods. Mornings, making my way to the fields, I must pass the kitchen, and she is always there. The child at her side, uncommonly fair and growing willful, all the more like her mother, who senses my gaze, but will not countenance it. This act of petition and refusal we replay as day gives way to day. And Douglas sputters over a bit of errant flour or sugar, tearing about in mindless rage. Unmoving, she wields silence in her body like an axe. Her body, no longer yielding the sweetness of the girl I knew. The other slaves whisper of what she's turned into. Obia woman claiming dominion over life and death, crooking out for herself and that child, undue position in the house. Jealousy is currency amongst the slaves, yet in times of need, the girls and women have no choice but to seek her. Douglas knows why. There are fewer and fewer births each passing year. He hears the scuttling truth, but facing Nancy, even he falls mute. Like all, he fiercely fears whatever he cannot rule nor can. This is in Isabella's voice. So, memory. My first was sound brought forth from her hands, wielding an axe, severing the necks of fowl, rending flesh from bone. That sound torn from a throat, the cries she'd made as a child rendered orphan, stolen across an ocean, hungering to feed, ceaselessly to feed. The second was no sound, but fire, kindled of her hands, lighting kitchen walls, dredging blood from the sea's memory, blood tilling soil, blood, not even rain that falls and falls without end. Not any water we cross, any riverbed stone can absolve. And then this is one of the two title poems, No Ruined Stone. When the dead return, they will come to you in dream, and in waking will be the bird knocking, knocking against glass, seeking a way in. Will masquerade as the wind, its voice made audible by the tongues of leaves, greedily lapping as this wave's self-made fugue is returning and returning. The dead will not then, nor ever again, desert you. Their unrest will be the coat cloaking you. The farther you journey from them, the more distance will maw in you. Time and place gulching when the dead return to demand accounting. Wanting and wanting and wanting everything you have to give, and nothing will quench or unhunger them as they take all you make as offering, then tell you to begin again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shara. Thank you all. Jessica and I will now, we're going to transition to some questions. Okay. Sorry, Jessica?
Yeah, did you want to start with, we got one question from the Q&A that we're seeing, and this can be a question directed at anybody that would like to take it up. But the question is, what is the one quality that distinguishes a poet from other literary writers, for instance, novelists, essayists, and so on? What is the one quality that distinguishes a poet?
One thing that he writes in short of words, short of sentence, and deeply sensitive. The words convey something deeper than just prose.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
And do it with music.
I would echo Martha and just say that, you know, I asked poetry to do the work that normally a novel would do in this particular book that I've written. So I think it is music, compression, and metaphor. The pressure on those things in a poem, to me, is what distinguishes it.
For me, poetry can do things that the other genres don't necessarily, in terms of conveying thought. So I can use language in a way that sort of jumps around in the way that my mind can jump around. It can turn ideas over and over in the same way that I'm like thinking about something and turning it over in my mind. And so I think that is one of the qualities that I find distinguishing in poetry.
Thank you.
There's an increased capacity for fragmentation that I think exists in poetry in a way that no other genre can handle. You know, you can break a line. You can pull a line across a page. You can perform erasure in a way that a prose document might not be able to handle. You can apply, you know, several of these poems are using multiple of these techniques. Just the poems I read tonight, where it'll be stretched across the page. It's utilizing footnotes. There is an element of erasure being employed. There's a multiplicity of techniques that you might not be able to layer into a piece of prose. And I'm not even writing, you know, the kind of visual or experimental work that some poets I adore do.
Thank you. Cyrus, did you want to say anything or? No pressure.
I guess I want to mention imagery and imagery's capacity to move us quickly beyond intellect. I think that's one of the qualities of poetry that I treasure. Also, sound means so much to me. I mean, I'm writing fiction and writing novels now about the sounds. I feel like I work like a poet still. I don't think I'm actually working the way a novelist is supposed to work, because I'm just so sound-oriented and language-oriented, and I go very slowly. So I think that's enough for now.
Thank you. We have another question for everyone. It comes from James O'Leary. How does the job or role of being a poet extend beyond the writing and editing of poems?
Okay, this is one way. We're reading poems. We're reading them to you. And while the writing is a very solitary act, the reading, the sharing is not. And one of the wonderful things about poetry is that it lives both within the poet and extends beyond.
For me, I just kind of think of what Ocean Vaughn said, which was that he might be the first person to have written a book in his family, but he's not the first poet in his family. And so what I take away from that is sort of being a poet. Like, there are poets who have never written a poem before, and they are still poets, and it has to do with a kind of observation of the world, of experiencing, of thinking through, of appreciating image, or that there's some quality that I can't quite pin down, but that writing the poem is not necessarily the being the poet part.
I think in many senses, you know, we take on so many social roles of healers, of archivists, of historians. There's so many social events that are remembered more from the poems written about them than necessarily the newspaper stories written about them. There is a sense in which there is an archive that exists in verse that we contribute to every single day as poets. And I think that is sometimes forgotten as one of the social roles we serve, is we contribute every day to, even when we are not speaking it, the written version of an oral history.
I think this is my own experience as a person who come from Vietnam. I find that the whole history of Vietnam until the modern time, every event that happened in Vietnam history, especially those who actually play a role as a poem, is written by those who was part of the event. And so when I grew up and studied Vietnamese history, the thing that impressed me the most was those poems. Because when I read it, I could reimagine exactly how that person felt at that moment. And if you have so many of those poems, it become an archive that it really train you to be a person of that tradition. I think with the modern age coming to Vietnam, that has become less of the event. People don't, in the past, every individual who holds a position in Vietnamese history has to graduate with the ability to write poems. So that's why we have so many poems. But today, that's no longer the case. So you don't have that many poems anymore. And I think that is a great loss.
You know, on the subject of history, I just want to add to what's already been said that I think one of the roles that a poet plays, especially when dealing with history, is to be able to write the histories that can't otherwise be written. So the historical record is somewhat limited for many peoples whose histories are not recorded, but poets have the capacity to reimagine, to revocalize, to inhabit these omissions and these spaces in history that otherwise can't be filled. And so I think that's a really important role as well.
Such beautifully profound answers. It's very inspiring. When I think of a person being a poet, I always think of Garcia Lorca, someone who's lived his life as a kind of force of nature. And when I think about artists, especially poets and actors, it feels like our job may be to help each other feel more deeply, that we're spiritual and emotional athletes at our best. And some of that process goes on internally and in our lives, and some of that gets shared publicly. And since I'm writing a lot in the 19th century, I'm constantly reminding myself, my novel is set in the 1880s, that it's Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson we come to for 19th century news. We don't go to journalism. Think about that. We don't go to sound bites, whether it's 19th century or the 21st century. That's why our legacy as poets and artists is so valuable, so that we can feel more deeply. I mean, the earth is a place of passion, in case you haven't noticed. We're here to feel emotion, despite what anyone else tells us, despite their strategies to shut their hearts down and whatever. They might as well be in the wrong, maybe they're in the wrong planet, but part of our job is to feel our way through this life and share the depths of what we're experiencing there. So that's my response to your very beautiful responses.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions popping up, so I'm gonna move on to one specifically for Torrin, and then we'll move to one, I guess the one maybe to Martha and Chung. So Torrin, I'll just read this out. They hope that you might describe the structure of the collection. I love the quasi-cycle of the essay fragments and wonder if the poems in the new book run in other sub-cycles. Also, if so, how did that structure come to be?
If I had to kind of describe the structure, it's kind of a constellation. There are a set of themes upon which the collection builds. Essentially, the collection is built upon an exploration of the parallel ways in which transness, disability, trauma, and mental illness are medicalized within our current system. And so these themes are sort of constellated in many ways. And part of this is I was very interested in subverting and exploring the language of the medical system and of these kinds of systems of oppression that rely on taking agency away from the patient. And so the essay fragments, the idea was to take these different frameworks that are applied either legally or through different frames that exist within the medical system for viewing disability, to tear them apart and use them as almost persona-like lenses, and then place my life within them and see how I could apply some torque to this. There's several that didn't make it into the book. There's probably 8 or 9 different models that have been used across the history of the medicalization and kind of social scope of disability. But this was one exploration within the book. There's also a series exploring multiple rare genetic disorders I have. But for the most part, this is a book with relatively few sequences, as it was kind of a book that demanded individual poems. There's some pairs, but it's not a book heavily built on sequences, which is one way it very much differs from the new project I'm working on. I hope that kind of answers some of the questions around the book structure.
Thank you for that. So quickly, we'll probably have time for maybe 2 more questions or so. This one is directed to Martha and Chung. How would you describe the Buddhist poetics or Zen aesthetic of Tui Sei?
Well,
Like a pop quiz, oh gosh.
let me start out first. Zen is a really difficult subject because it's considered to be the highest achievement in Buddhism. So the saying that usually involved with Zen is that it could not be said. You could not really vocalize it. So the whole history, the saying about Zen is that it's a school that does not establish itself as a school. It goes beyond the sutra, and it's ultimately wordless, without words. But actually, the Zen school itself produces enormous amount of words, contrary to its very existence. So, you know, it is a very difficult subject to explain. But when you read a Zen poem, you could sense it. You could realize what it is trying to get it without vocalizing it.
I'm going to add to that by reading a quatrain from a sequence called Sleep Talking in Prison. Solitary cell. I live in a sky of boundless space, a Zen landscape of nothingness. No things, no people, no busyness, just flowers strewn by the goddess.
It's gorgeous. Thank you so much for that. This is our last question of the evening. This is for all of you. How do you approach tone, whether in your lyrical poems or translations, as you write about desire and reckon with history?
Well, I suppose I can speak to this a bit. The poems that I've written in this most recent book are all dramatic monologues. So for me, the attitude of the speaker toward the situation has to come through very clearly. And so it's an act, it's a form of acting, really, that I am doing. It's an impersonation. And so the closer that I can get to showing what this person looks at the world through their eyes, how it looks through their eyes, is how close I can get to tone. And diction is the craft answer to this question. It's control of diction, right? But the larger question is, what is the attitude of my speaker toward what is happening? What is the situation of the poem? So, yeah.
So I can add to that, which is when I'm thinking of tone, I guess I'm not always actively engaged in it. I mean, I think that, for example, with these ode poems that have such a strong voice throughout, the way that I came to that was less trying to evoke a certain tone and more entering it through a space of language. And when I'm writing, sort of just letting the poem come out and guide me. And I think that tone ends up coming through, and it's my job to sort of pick up on it and see what's going on. So for example, one of the odes had a bunch of don'ts or nots or like negating. And I was like, when I was revising, I was going, this has too many of the same word. You know, I have to take this out. And then part of me had to go, wait, it's there for a reason. And then I had that sort of opened up the poem for me, which was, oh, this is sort of different from the other poems. This is a poem about negation. It is this sort of negativity. The speaker is describing sort of like unhealthy relationships, and it's sort of like the opposite of an ode. So that's what became an anti-ode in the book, and it arrived through a place of language.
I've always been very committed to the idea that I do not have one voice or tone. The idea of polyvocality in my work, particularly polyvocality in a single poem. Being someone who comes from like a very low class background and went to college and immediately had to kind of involve myself in academia and learn the language of like Southern California college and getting a job there to survive and make enough money to pay rent in Southern California from where I came in like a farming town in Central California, there is a certain code switching involved in that. And so that has always been embedded in my poetics, is that idea of how do I move through this. And so also learning a kind of canon poetics when I did have the opportunity to take poetry classes versus the poetry I was actually interested in, a more contemporary poetics I was engaging in at the time. I've later kind of gained an appreciation for some of the works that I hated at the moment I was learning them. But this way of how do I say one thing in one line and switch tones by the next line, this mode of kind of how do I involve a volta every other line, or switch tones and leave the reader unsettled. And that's something that I think more and more as I write, I want to crank higher and higher and ratchet my ability to do that further, because I'm very interested in this idea of unsettling the stability of a single voice in my work. Particularly when talking about desire, because I think the tension between like the beautiful, the lyrical, and the profane is something that, like, how can that not be the mode in which I talk about desire, particularly from the position of a body that is inherently seen by so much of society as disgusting, as verboten, as literally monstrous.
Translation's a little different from writing original poetry in some ways. Robert Pinsky, I think I'm paraphrasing, said something like, translation is almost like writing. And of course, you're bringing all your poetic skills to the task, but you're not bringing desire. And in that sense, it's a kind of Buddhist act in itself. What Shara said about inhabiting the character's voice, what Chung and I together have tried to do is to not replicate Toisi's voice, but to find something that's equivalent, the equivalent of it. And it's a very deep and rewarding process that really takes one altogether outside of oneself. I'm very grateful for it.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Or okay. Thank you so much to our poets. Virtual round of applause. Thank you for everybody for attending. You know, I know there's a lot of things and options going on right now, so thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention, which is at an all-time deficit these days. We appreciate you. And also think about subscribing to AGNI if you haven't already. And pick up this issue. It is off the chain. It's really great. So, Sven, did you want to say anything?
I do. Hello again. First thing, just personally, I realized how much I love to hear not only poets read, but poets talk. The talk is sometimes as good as the reading. So anyway, I'm very grateful for that. And there's so much lyric intelligence. When that happens, I feel that I've somehow traveled, which is not a common sensation, but when I hear it, I have that feeling. It's a different kind of travel. It's not airplane travel, but it's a movement somewhere inside. So I'm very grateful to everyone, to the hosts and the readers, and also to Cynthia Ayeza, who managed our chat.